Okay. All right, so let's go back. She did win. What did the Supreme Court say about Dred Scott? Because to be honest with you, they never even had to deal with the Missouri Compromise. Go ahead.
Didn't they say that he wasn't considered to be a man, but more like a puppet?
He was. They said in this case, Dred Scott, you don't have the right to be able to sue. You don't have the standing to be able to sue because, Dred Scott, you're not a man. You're actually property. And the example that I had used in every class is I asked somebody, did you have a car? And people said yes. And I asked you, is your car yours in Maryland or Florida or Maine or Washington or California? And everybody said, yeah, my car is my car wherever I go. Well, if you think about it, your car can't go sue in court. Your horse can't go sue in court. Your cactus can't go sue in court because these are things. And this is considered the worst case in American Supreme Court history, in part because they said Dred Scott, who was a man, wasn't really a man. He was just like a cactus or a horse or a car in today's context. They said he was property. What was the other thing that came of this?
If they traveled north, then he would still be considered a slave.
If a slave went beyond the 3630, they were still a slave in the South.
They basically struck down the Missouri Compromise. And this is where the car example comes in. If your car is your car, if your car is your property, wherever you are in the United States, then the logic was a slave should be your property wherever you are in the United States. It doesn't matter if you go above 36 degrees 30 minutes or if you go below. And I cautioned you that when you have these arranged or organized cases, guess what? Sometimes you can lose, and sometimes this actually makes things a little bit worse. It was in this context that they fought the Civil War. It was in this context, ultimately, that the Civil War was won by the northern states, by the Union states, and then ultimately they began to try and put some things together, the country that is, with the Civil War amendments, the 13th, the 14th, and the 15th Amendments. I'm not going to do a lot with you regarding the 14th Amendment because that one's a little thicker maybe for this class, maybe better for civil rights. But what did the 13th Amendment do?
It involved slavery.
The 13th Amendment finally abolished slavery, and it also abolished involuntary servitude. So that was a big deal. What was the significance of the 15th Amendment?
Voting, I think.
What's that?
Voting rights for men.
Voting rights for the newly freedmen. What was the controversy with this, though?
They didn't give women the rights to vote.
Okay, that's part of it, but that would probably be a bigger controversy later. Go ahead.
They couldn't discriminate based on your race,
Color.
color, and one other.
One other.
History of servitude, I think it was.
Previous condition of servitude. Remember, in all of the classes, I had somebody draft a sample 15th Amendment. And people inevitably would come up with something to the effect of, the freedmen have the right to vote. But the 15th Amendment doesn't say that these people have the right to vote. But what it says is that you cannot deny the right to vote on account of race or color or previous condition of servitude. Which means, did it really give people the right to vote? No, it gave you reasons that you couldn't deny the right to vote, but that means that you could deny them for other reasons. Pay really good attention to the voting rights test video that me and Sarah shot at Lincoln.
That was the bubble test, right?
What bubble test?
Where they would make someone...
Soap bubble test.
They make you wash your hands with bar soap and you have to count the bubbles in the soap.
I asked y'all, every single class, I asked somebody if they showered that day, and some of you lied, but everybody said yes. And I asked if you were a soap bubble or a shower gel person, and then I asked if you could count the bubbles that were in that bar of soap. And nobody could count the bubbles. Some of them are small, some of them pop quickly, some people overdo it with the lather. I heard all sorts of reasons. And I think I had even shown you another video, didn't I? You remember what the other video was?
The Tootsie Pop.
How many licks does it take to get to the center of a Tootsie Roll Pop? Same kind of thing. You don't have one specific answer. Bottom line, if the people that were running the polls wanted you to vote, if you gave them any number whatsoever, they would say, yeah, that's right. And if in fact they didn't want you to vote, even if you gave them the same answer that somebody else had just given, they would not let you vote. Who specifically did they deny the right to vote to?
Colored men.
Poor
Okay, free slaves, colored men,
Poor whites.
poor whites too. Remember, you can't deny on account of race, color, or previous condition of servitude. Well, if you only denied the freedmen, that means that there's a racial component. They denied poor whites the right to vote as well. Do you remember any of the other tests? Go ahead.
They have the jelly bean, and then they also talk about like if your grandfather had voted and enslaved, they know that was impossible.
You had the jelly bean test where you had to guess the amount of jelly beans that were in a jar. Couldn't touch them, you just had to eyeball it. Here's the funny thing about the soap bubble test and the jelly bean test. The people that were actually administering the tests oftentimes did not know how many jelly beans or bubbles were in a bar of soap themselves. But because they were in the position of power, they could decide who voted. And again, the newly freedmen and the poor whites. You mentioned the grandfather clause. Grandfather clause would basically say something to the effect of, if your grandfather could vote before such and such a date, which is basically the date that slavery was ended, then you would be allowed to vote. Well, obviously, the newly freedmen who had previously been slaves, their grandfathers would have been slaves. They would not have been allowed to vote. But because voting was based on property qualifications, a lot of poor whites who had grandfathers would not have voted either because their grandfathers didn't have enough property, so they got around the race and the color and the previous condition of servitude requirement. There were two others.
They would give
Literacy test.
really difficult, like rigged tests about government.
Literacy tests. Yeah, you'd have to read a passage or you'd have to answer questions about government. We throw a lot of examples in there about literacy tests, so take a look at the video. And then the other one was the poll tax. And remember, it wasn't just the ability or the inability to pay the actual poll tax, which, go ahead.
You have to like hold on to your receipt until it's time to vote again.
Yeah.
A lot of people will lose it.
In today's money, it would have been about a $50 poll tax. So there would have been a lot of people that wouldn't have been able to pay. But not only if you could pay would you have to pay it, but you would have to have done it a while in advance prior to the election, and then you would have had to have kept up with the receipt. So if you showed up on election day with the equivalent of $50 today, which would probably have been between $1 and $5 back then, you wouldn't have been able to pay even if you could on election day. And if you paid months in advance, but you lost the receipt that proved that you paid, they wouldn't let you vote then. And this again eliminated a lot of it eliminated freedmen, it eliminated a lot of poor whites too. Take a good look at that video. Regarding articles from this chapter, and I'll just kind of pop in here really quick. We did have several that were up here, and I don't want to run out of time on this. The political correctness ones, oh my God. There were a lot of examples of political correctness. We talked about height. We talked about little people. We talked about the Christian roommate. We talked about addressing people in college campuses as Mr. or Mrs. We talked about words that were banned on achievement tests. Do you remember any of those words?
Junk food.
Junk food.
Halloween.
Halloween.
Dinosaur.
Dinosaur.
Birthday.
Birthday. Dancing. We talked about a lot of words that got banned on there, so kind of keep that in mind. We talked about Iowa and the old or elderly people there. Do you remember?
Dead on arrival.
Dead on arrival. The Department of Elder Affairs was changed to the Department on Aging because they did not want to disrespect the older Iowans, but it was abbreviated. They would send them to the DOA, and older folks in Iowa got upset because they were sending them to the hospital term dead on arrival, and being politically correct actually backfired. Do you remember Delaware? Delaware Department of Transportation pamphlets.
It was like what not to say to specific
Things that you could not say to your coworkers if you worked in the government agency, the Delaware Department of Transportation. I believe it was referred to as they referred to it as faux pas, or things that you weren't supposed to say. Can you remember any of them?
where are you from? Right?
No, I don't remember where you're from in that.
Going up to a.
What about fried chicken?
You cannot like invite person of color, like person that you eat fried chicken.
It actually specifically said in there that you could not approach black coworkers and either offer them fried chicken or watermelon. And if you remember in one of the links, the Fuzzy Zeller Tiger Woods link that dealt with fried chicken, collard greens, whatever the hell they eat, that kind of a thing, link some of these things together. Give me some more.
Like, for example, like, I'm not, okay, let's say, for example, the thinking that the Asian guy was the technical whatever, something like that.
Oh, you're not supposed to go up to a coworker and say, "Oh, you're Asian. You must be the new IT guy." And people laughed about this a little bit uncomfortably. And see, that might not even be necessarily a negative stereotype, but it's still a stereotype. That's the thing. And you might be trying to be helpful offering somebody fried chicken. And a number of people even said, you know what, if you didn't offer me fried chicken and you were eating it, I would get madder than hell. But if you watch that Tiger and Fuzzy video, you get how it can kind of spiral out of control. He did use the term boy. That's another good one. Anything else that you can remember from Delaware?
Wasn't it like you can't go up to like a Hispanic and ask for like landscaping?
You cannot ask an Hispanic coworker for help with your landscaping.
Or
You
the
cannot.
Mexican restaurant.
You cannot ask if you can recommend a good Mexican restaurant. Regarding the Asian category again, you cannot go up to somebody and ask if they can recommend a good Chinese restaurant. And in fact, if you remember the Seinfeld clip that I gave you, what were the words that seemed to be problematic when he was trying to date the Native American woman?
Reservation.
Reservations was one.
Scalping.
Scalping for tickets was one. Indian giver was another one that he had gone, and there were a number of other things that were in there. Go back and look at these because we spent a lot of time on political correctness. These could be multiple choices or essays, but be able to identify what was said, make sure that you can identify why it was wrong. Okay, why it was wrong. Go ahead.
What was the Christian roommate one?
There was the one, I think it was in Michigan, where somebody put an ad where they requested a Christian roommate. And it was caught by Michigan authorities, and they decided that the woman needed some training so that she would not make that discriminatory mistake again. If you remember in the Delaware one, and just to go back to the links really quick, we haven't talked about Joe Biden. And Joe Biden had a real slew of things, if you remember, in his link in there. But Joe Biden had dropped words like clean, articulate. Oh, it's a fairy tale, man, if you remember this kind of a thing, describing Barack, and that Delaware Department of Transportation dealt, and we discussed this idea of articulate. If it bothered you, if somebody came up to you and said, wow, you speak really well if you looked like you didn't come from here, or if it bothered you if somebody came up to you and spoke in a foreign language, if your appearance suggested that you should speak a foreign language. So it goes in, or sometimes how they would get mad at you in a foreign language if you were only speaking in English. We talked about these kinds of things. So keep that kind of piece in mind. I think that gives us the links. The articles on this, you remember you know what? I don't know that I added this. The NBA dress code.
It is in there.
Yeah.
The article is, but I don't think the Allen Iverson link, and I don't think the Chris Paul links are. What was the deal with the NBA dress code?
They imposed a dress code that seemed to be specific.
What kinds of things did let me ask you this.
Chain is not.
Well, hang on. A normal dress code, what does it do?
Tells you what you can wear, what you should wear.
A normal dress code tells you what you can or you should wear. Khakis, or button-down shirt, or a certain length of a skirt, or, maybe no open-toed shoes, or, you get the idea. But it's fairly mainstream, and it really doesn't matter who you are. It really is making a dress code based upon gender. What was the problem? And you started to say it. What's the problem with the NBA dress code?
You can't wear, and they said you shouldn't wear a chain that's the weight of a small child around your neck. That's one of them. And then they
Shouldn't wear a chain that has with a pendant the size and the approximate size and weight of a small child. Go ahead.
You couldn't have your hat to the side.
Hats cocked to the side. Go ahead.
So all of those things that they listed actually tagged it with like one race, and then most of the players in the NBA were like,
The NBA is like over 80% black, I believe is what the article had said. And I believe it said in there that people like Paul Pierce and Marcus Camby, Paul Pierce was a superstar at that point, Marcus Camby was a good player, there were some others, basically